I thought I would do an emergency episode related to the Texas deep freeze and the prolonged power outage. As you can see, super snowy here. It's Thursday. The deep freeze hit over the weekend, and the we got probably 6 to 8 inches of snow, which, as you can imagine, in a place like Austin is it just shuts everything down. But the worst part was the cold. It got down into single digits, and the power for me and for most of the people in Austin, and certainly a huge swath, my neighborhood and the neighborhoods around it in East Austin, went down just before 2 a.m. on Monday morning. To me, it's like Sunday night, and it just came on. Today is Thursday. It came on around 7 a.m. Who knows how long it's going to stay on. So I thought in this emergency episode, I would talk about how the Powerwall and the solar panels have performed. The short answer is they've done a pretty darn good job. I'm so glad I had them. I've had power somewhat every day. Last night was the only night that I didn't have heat at all, but I still had the ambient leftovers from having heat the days before, at least some heat the days before. So I'll go through the details. I learned a lot about the Powerwall, and I think I put it through its paces, and other Powerwall owners around here probably did the same thing, to go without the grid for so long, and to completely run it down in a deep freeze. Mine's outside. And then to try to bring it back up when the solar panels are producing is pretty tough. So as a programming note, I have another episode along the way that there's a lot of editing involved, and it's going to be a super long episode. But given the timeliness of this, I thought I'd jump in and do this episode first. So, as I mentioned, we had about 6 to 8 inches of snow, and that covered the solar panels. And I actually spoke to my solar installer, and he said the same thing's been happening all over the region. That the snow hasn't melted off the east side of the panels, for people that have them, of course. And on the west panels, everybody around the region, the snow has melted off of them pretty quickly. So we're 4 days in, and yesterday was the first day that got above freezing. And the east side panels still have about the same amount of snow as the end of day Monday. Some at the top are clear, but at the bottom it's still got a lot of snow on it. The panels on the west side of the house, the rear of the house, I didn't check them on Monday, but on Tuesday they were mostly clear. I would say like 95% clear. And yesterday, Wednesday, they were completely clear. So in practice, what that has meant is that I'm getting sun and electricity and charge in the afternoon, starting around 12:30, 1 o'clock, as the sun gets to that side of the house, and then it goes through the evening. The bigger challenge has been what you can see here with the sky, is the gray sky. Just about the time I started getting charge on Tuesday, I ran out of power in the middle of the night, Tuesday morning, for the first time, and I was hoping to get charge in the morning, and it was sunny, but I had snow on the panels. So I thought I was going to collect some, but I think in hindsight I wasn't collecting electricity, and so the Powerwall was empty. It didn't have enough to boot up. I spent the morning fiddling with it, trying to get it going, thinking that there was a problem with the circuit breaker or something. But I think the challenge was that I thought that the panels on the east side should be producing, and they just weren't getting enough sun, and they weren't producing, and so it couldn't, as it were, boot everything up. It magically started working when the sun hit the west side of the house, and I started getting more electricity, and so I got a good amount of charge. At times it was going 3 kilowatts, which is about, on a good day, normally I get a 5 kilowatt flow in the afternoon. So, 3/5 of what I normally get. Challenge is the clouds rolled in just a few hours later, and so I didn't, I didn't collect as much as I would have hoped and would have liked. But it was enough that I could heat the house up. I got the house warmed up, cooked a meal, had lights in the evening. Obviously, I was keeping it, I was trying to ration my power. But again, I ran out of power that night. And then the next day, Wednesday, yesterday, was just like this. And I didn't collect until the afternoon. It did magically start coming up. I didn't mess with it in the morning. It came up on its own in the afternoon, but I don't think I ever collected. I never had a flow of more than 1 kilowatt. Most of the time it was 300 watts, 600 watts, 900 watts. But it was enough that I could get some internet, make a few phone calls, and cook a meal and stuff like that, and run the refrigerator. That has been a key part of all of this, is that I've had power frequently enough that the refrigerator will come on and run, and so far I haven't lost anything in my freezer. So that's fantastic. And then the last thing that's a surprise that has nothing to do with the Powerwall is that the cell networks have pretty much failed around here. And now that the power's back on in my neighborhood, the cell connection has suddenly become really good. So I'm guessing their generators and either their backups failed or something. But I've only been able to text, and even then text messages have been going really slow. I haven't really been able to make a phone call since Monday without having internet connection and doing voice over IP using my Google Fiber connection. So, it's been a lifesaver. I haven't completely come out of this unscathed, but I've been really lucky compared to a lot of people out here. And I feel like I've learned enough on this now that if I needed to build a system to live off the grid, I totally can do it. That's probably another episode and another exercise, but I'm super thrilled I have this thing. And I feel sorry for the other folks that didn't have anything like this. And hopefully the power companies will, fix these problems so that this doesn't happen again. I'm going to do a walkthrough of the system here. So the solar panels come down through this conduit. The power from the solar panels comes down through this conduit. On the far left, this is the inverter. There's a light on there that shows that it's producing power. There's a on-off switch to shut off the power from the inverter. Then there is a meter that calculates how much solar I'm producing. Then that goes to my main breaker box that goes to my sub panel, as well as various circuits in my house. It also has a circuit breaker for the inverter, and it also has a surge protector breaker. This is the Tesla gateway. There's actually a computer board in there that's the brains of the system. This is the power going out to the grid or coming in from the grid. This makes the decision about what power to pull, what to push, all of that jazz. Then there's a connection over to a switch, a hard switch for the storage system to the power walls. These are circuit breakers for each of the power walls, and then this goes over to the power wall itself, or the power walls. I have two. You can see conduit going into the power wall, and then the lights pulse one way when they're charging, which is kind of hard to see the lights, but they pulse they're supposed to pulse when they're charging, and they pulse opposite directions when they're draining. And it looks like both of them are pulsing right now, which is a good sign. And then there's also an on-off switch. If to reset the system, you can reset those. You can just flip that on and off, and it'll essentially restart the system. And one thing I have learned in all of this is that every 6 minutes it wakes up when the battery's below 10% and it loses power. Every 6 minutes it tries to wake up to see if there's either solar power or grid power. But you can force it. If it comes on quickly, you can do the on-off switch and it'll start pulling directly. I've been having, ever since the first time the Powerwall went out, when it ran all the way down, I've had trouble with this circuit breaker blowing, which I've never had before. So as the power came on and Storm Watch kicked in, I thought it was charging, but in fact, just turn those off and turn them back on. So that's forcing the Powerwalls to reboot. The circuit breaker had popped. So I called Tesla just a little while ago, because I've had power since about 7 a.m. and it hasn't been pulling down even though Storm Watch is enabled. And I reset my gateway, which is the computer part of it, and Tesla support actually was surprised that they answered pretty quickly, and they were able to dial into my computer. Looks like because the cell network was bad, it lost connection to the cell network overnight, but then it got it again this morning. And there's something weird about it, that one of the batteries is not as charged as the other. That's probably because of the circuit breaker that blew. But it's not sucking everything down from the grid like it should in a typical Storm Watch scenario. So I kicked it into backup mode at their suggestion, so that all my solar power would go to the Powerwall, and hopefully get it charged enough that it is out of the depletion mode or whatever, and that it could start pulling from the grid. So I sure hope it does, because as you might be able to see, it's starting to snow again, snowing pretty hard. I doubt that I'm going to get much sun today, and I've heard from neighbors that the grid was only up in other neighborhoods for a few hours, and it's been up for about 3 hours here, so it's probably about time for it to go down. So and I have zero charge right now. So I've been able to warm up my house, make some coffee, boil some water, because with the water supply has been corrupted with power plants or water plants losing power. Well, it looks like the electricity is going to stay on. It's mid-afternoon, and I've had electricity all day, and the Powerwall's charging up, and so far so good. And I've seen news reports that there's no expectations of more power cuts. So hopefully this is the end of it. It's supposed to snow a little bit more, but all the snow we've gotten today hasn't really accumulated. So I'm hoping this whole crazy crisis is over with, and we figure out how to make things better in the future. This has been a fantastic test of my solar and storage system. I think the Powerwall really performed well, even though I had some learning issues on it, and I think I pushed it sort of to its limit, or at least the weather pushed it to its limits. But I'm not getting endorsed by anybody, but I absolutely am glad I have it, and I think it works really well. And I hope to have one in any house I have in the future if I ever live in another house. So with that, so long for now.